The instruction was written in the same hand that signed leases and dismissed tenants. 3 lines. No greeting, no closing, no signature beyond the initial BS at the bottom of the page, pressed into the paper with the efficiency of a man who did not expect to be questioned. Remove the Duchess of Denham from the guest list for the Fairbourne ball. Confirm when completed. Mr. Ives read it twice, not because the words were unclear, they were brutally clear, but because the act of reading them a second time allowed him a moment to decide what expression to wear when he looked up. He settled on none at all. He folded the note, placed it inside his ledger, and said, "Very good, Your Grace," to the empty doorway through which the Duke of Denham had already passed. The instruction had arrived on a Tuesday. The Fairbourne ball was Saturday. Between those days lay a distance that should have been more than sufficient for a competent secretary to execute a simple social erasure. And Mr. Ives was, by every measure, competent. He had managed the Duke's correspondence for 11 years without a single misplaced letter. He had navigated political dinners, diplomatic refusals, and the particular cruelty of declining invitations from men who held seats beside the Duke in the House of Lords. He was not a man who failed at tasks, but this task sat differently in his hands. He knew, as everyone in the household knew, that the Duchess had been living at the Dower House since the previous autumn. 8 months. The removal had not been dramatic. There had been no argument overheard by servants, no scene at dinner, no trunk-laden carriage departing in rain. She had simply, over the course of several weeks, moved her books, her writing desk, her morning tea service, and finally herself to the stone cottage at the eastern edge of the grounds. And the great house had absorbed her absence the way a body absorbs a wound it does not yet know is fatal. The Duke had not commented on it. Not once. He continued his schedule. The House of Lords through the parliamentary session, the estate through the autumn, his study through the winter, as though the arrangement were architectural rather than marital, as though she had merely relocated to a different room. Mr. Ives understood, in the way that men who serve powerful households come to understand without being told, that the Duke's instruction regarding the guest list was not cruelty. It was embarrassment. Barnaby Stowe did not wish to sit beside a woman he had driven away in front of 300 people who would be watching for precisely that. He did not wish the county to see the distance between them measured in silence across a supper table. Embarrassment, Mr. Ives reflected as he stared at the folded note in his ledger, was often worse than cruelty. Cruelty at least acknowledged the other person's existence, he wrote to Lady Fairbourne's secretary on Wednesday. The letter was composed with care. He cited a scheduling conflict, suggested the Duchess might be indisposed. He sent it by the afternoon post. On Thursday, he received a reply not from the secretary but from Lady Fairbourne herself, written on cream paper in a hand that did not bother with diplomacy. My dear Mr. Ives, the invitation was issued by me, and it stands. I do not discuss my guest list with secretaries. If His Grace has concerns, he may raise them with me directly, and I shall enjoy the conversation enormously. Mr. Ives read the letter, folded it, and placed it in a drawer he rarely opened. He did not inform the Duke that the instruction had failed. He told himself he was waiting for an appropriate moment. The appropriate moment did not arrive. By Friday evening, when the household began preparations for the ball, the note still sat in its drawer, and Mr. Ives sat with it, and neither of them moved. At the Dower House, the invitation had arrived on Wednesday morning. Cecily Stowe read it at the small writing desk she had positioned beneath the window that faced away from the great house, a choice so deliberate that even Mrs. Quelch, who had served the family for 19 years and cultivated the art of noticing nothing, had noticed it. The invitation was written in Lady Fairbourne's own hand. That alone told Cecily everything she needed to know. Formal invitations were handled by secretaries. Personal ones were handled by friends who understood that what they were offering was not merely a seat at a table, but a choice. She set the card on the desk and looked at it for a long time. Through the window, she could hear the gardener. Farrant had sent him, she suspected, though neither man would admit it, working the beds along the cottage wall. The roses were coming in. She had planted them herself in November, pushing bulbs into cold earth with bare hands because there had been no one to tell her not to, and the act of kneeling in mud had felt, for the first time in months, like something she had chosen rather than something she had endured. 8 months. She had not counted them deliberately. The counting had happened to her, the way weather happened, marking itself against windows and walls whether one wished it to or not. 8 months since the last evening, she had sat across from Barnaby at dinner and understood with the quiet certainty of a woman who had spent 4 years studying a man's silences that he was not going to speak. Not that evening, not the next. Not because he was angry or wounded, but because he had simply stopped finding the effort worthwhile. She had not wept. She had not confronted him. She had done what women of her position had done for centuries when the architecture of a marriage revealed itself to be decorative rather than structural. She had found a smaller room and made it her own. But the invitation was not a room. It was a door. She replied on Thursday, one line in her own hand. I shall be delighted to attend. On Saturday afternoon, she opened the wardrobe in the Dower House bedroom, a smaller wardrobe than the one she had left behind, holding fewer gowns, each one chosen with the deliberation of a woman who understood that what she had kept mattered more than what she had left. The silver silk was at the back. She had not worn it since the season before her marriage, when she had been Cecily Wren and the world had not yet decided what to do with her. It still fit. She was not surprised. She had changed in every way that mattered except the physical ones, which were, she reflected, as she fastened the pearl strand at her throat, the ones that mattered least. Mrs. Quelch appeared in the doorway as Cecily was dressing her hair. The housekeeper said nothing for a moment. She had learned, over 19 years of service, that the most useful thing a servant could do was frequently nothing at all. And then she said, "Will you require the carriage brought round, Your Grace? For 8:30, if you please. Shall I inform the great house?" Cecily met her eyes in the glass. The question contained several others, none of which Mrs. Quelch would ask directly, and all of which Cecily understood. "No," she said, "I do not believe the great house requires informing." Mrs. Quelch nodded. She adjusted a fold in the gown that did not need adjusting and left the room, and Cecily sat for a long time before the mirror, looking at a woman she had not seen in 8 months, the Duchess of Denham, dressed for a ball, with pearls at her throat and a composure so complete it might have been mistaken for indifference by anyone who did not know what it cost. On Saturday evening, the Fairbourne estate blazed. 300 candles in the ballroom chandeliers, another 100 in the sconces along the corridors, and the effect from the drive was of a house that had swallowed the sun and was holding it behind glass. Carriages lined the approach for a quarter mile. The county had turned out in force. This was Lady Fairbourne's annual ball, the event against which all other social occasions in the district measured themselves, and absence from it was noted with the precision of an accountant marking a debt. The Duke of Denham arrived at 8:30. He was dressed impeccably, dark tailcoat, white cravat tied with architectural precision, waistcoat of dove-gray silk that caught the candlelight and held it. He greeted Lady Fairbourne in the receiving line with the controlled warmth of a man who understood that social performance was a form of governance, and he performed it well. He took his place in the ballroom, accepted a glass of champagne from a footman whose name he did not know, and surveyed the room with the satisfaction of a man who believed he had arranged the evening's terms. The chair beside him was empty. Protocol demanded it remain so. The Duchess's seat at any formal occasion was at her husband's right hand. He had expected it to stay empty all evening, a gap in the seating that would be noted, wondered about, and ultimately absorbed into the general understanding that the Duke of Denham's marriage was a private matter that polite society would respect by not discussing until the carriage ride home. Cecily arrived at 9. She came through the main entrance, not the garden door. She wore a gown of pale silver silk, empire waist, the fabric catching the light with each step so that she appeared to carry her own illumination, with her hair dressed simply, a single strand of pearls at her throat, and gloves that reached above her elbows in unbroken white kid leather. She looked, Lady Fairbourne observed from her position near the doorway, exactly like a woman who had spent 8 months deciding what to wear to her own reappearance and had chosen, with devastating accuracy, the appearance of someone who had not thought about it at all. The room noticed. Not all at once. A ballroom of 300 does not turn as a single body, but in stages, the way a current moves through water. A murmur near the door, a turned head, then another. Then a silence that spread outward from the entrance like ripples from a stone, until it reached the far wall where the Duke of Denham stood with his champagne and his carefully arranged evening and his empty chair. He saw her. The glass did not tremble in his hand. His expression did not change. But his body shifted, a quarter turn toward the door that he corrected almost immediately, as though his muscles had betrayed an instinct his mind had overruled. He watched her cross the room. She did not look at him. She greeted Lady Fairborn with a kiss on both cheeks, continental, intimate, a gesture that told every observer in the room exactly whose invitation had brought her here. She accepted a glass of champagne. She smiled at the Countess of Bracewell, who had been watching the entrance with the avidity of a woman who understood that the evening had just become significantly more interesting. Then she walked to the empty chair beside the Duke of Denham and sat down. She did not ask permission. She did not acknowledge the 8 months. She simply gathered her skirts with the practiced economy of a woman who had been sitting in formal chairs since she was 16, lowered herself into the seat that was hers by marriage, by protocol, and by the immovable fact of English social law, and arranged her hands in her lap. "Good evening, Your Grace," she said. Her voice carried exactly far enough to be heard by the 3 nearest guests and no further. The Duke looked at his wife. She looked at the room. The distance between those 2 gazes contained the entire history of their marriage, and everyone who saw it understood. He could not ask her to leave. The realization settled over him like weather, not sudden, but total. She was the Duchess of Denham. This was a formal ball. Her seat was beside him. To remove her would require a scene so grotesque that it would define him for the remainder of his social life in the county. He would become the man who had his wife escorted from a ballroom. No political career, no estate, no seat in the House of Lords survived that story. She knew this. He knew she knew this. And she knew he knew she knew this, which was the most unbearable part of all. The evening unfolded. Lord Whitmore approached first, a baronet of moderate fortune and immoderate kindness who had always liked Cecily and who now greeted her with the warmth of a man who did not care whether the Duke approved. "Your Grace," he said, bowing over her hand, "the room is improved immeasurably by your presence." He said it loudly enough that the Duke heard every syllable. Cecily smiled. "You are too kind, Lord Whitmore. I believe the room was already quite accomplished without me." Accomplished? Yes. Complete? No. She inclined her head in acknowledgement, and Lord Whitmore moved on, and the pattern was established. Over the next hour, a procession of guests approached the Duchess of Denham, some from genuine affection, some from curiosity, some from the irresistible social impulse to be seen near the center of the evening's drama. She received them all with identical composure. She asked after children by name. She remembered ailments, engagements, the particular shade of a gown worn at a previous event. She was, in short, magnificent, and the Duke sat beside her and watched it happen with the expression of a man who had just discovered that the walls he had built to contain a situation had been, all along, made of glass. Lady Fairborn watched from across the room. She had positioned herself near the musicians, close enough to observe, far enough to deny surveillance. She had known Cecily since they were girls, had stood beside her at her wedding, had watched the light in her friend's expression dim over 4 years of marriage to a man who treated companionship as an administrative inconvenience. She had sent the invitation knowing exactly what it was. She had received Mr. Ives's letter and dismissed it with the contempt it deserved. And now, she watched Cecily sit in her rightful chair and reclaim the room that her husband had tried to close to her, and she felt something that was not quite satisfaction and not quite grief, but occupied the space between them where friendship lives. Supper was announced at 10. The table had been set for 300, and the Duchess of Denham's place card, which Lady Fairborn's secretary had written out on Wednesday morning before Mr. Ives's letter had arrived, and which Lady Fairborn had personally ensured remained in place after it did, sat at the Duke's right hand. Cecily took her seat without comment. She unfolded her napkin. She tasted the soup. She complimented Lady Fairborn on the wine, which was, in fairness, exceptional. The Duke ate in silence. Not the comfortable silence of a man at ease, but the rigid silence of a man who understood that every word he spoke would be measured against the woman beside him, and found wanting. He cut his meat. He moved his fork. He performed the mechanics of a meal with the precision of a man who had forgotten what appetite felt like and was relying entirely on procedure. Cecily filled the space he had emptied. She spoke to the gentleman on her other side, a young MP whose name the Duke did not catch, about the proposed reforms to the poor laws, and her observations were so precisely informed that the young man set down his own fork and listened with the expression of someone who has just realized he is outmatched. She had read the committee report. It emerged. She had read the dissenting opinion. She had formed a view that the young MP admitted, with visible discomfort, was more nuanced than his own. The Duke heard every word. He could not help it. She was 3 inches from his right arm. He could smell her perfume, jasmine and something underneath it, something green and private that he had once known the name of and had forgotten, the way he had forgotten so many things about her that he was now being forced to remember in the worst possible setting. At one point during the fish course, the Countess of Bracewell leaned across the table and said, "Your Grace, we have missed you dreadfully at the Thursday concerts. Shall we see you this season?" And Cecily replied, "I believe you shall, Lady Bracewell. I have been practicing a new piece, Handel, and I shall need a sympathetic audience for the first attempt." The laughter that followed was warm and genuine and included everyone at their end of the table except the Duke, who was not laughing because he had not known his wife played Handel, and the realization of how much he did not know had begun to accumulate with the specific, physical weight of stones being placed one by one on a man's chest. After supper, the dancing resumed. Cecily danced the first set with Lord Whitmore, who acquitted himself admirably for a man of 63. She danced the second with the young MP, who acquitted himself less admirably, but with enthusiasm. She danced the third with Colonel Ashburn, whose wife watched from the edge of the room with an expression of amused approval. She danced every dance that was offered, and every dance was offered, because by 10:30 it had become clear to every person in the Fairbourne ballroom that dancing with the Duchess of Denham was the social act of the evening, and those who did not were simply those who had not yet found the courage to ask. The Duke did not dance. He stood at the edge of the floor with a glass he did not drink and watched his wife move through the room he had tried to empty of her. He watched the candlelight catch the silver of her gown. He watched her laugh, a sound, he realized, with a sensation that felt like something tearing very quietly behind his ribs, he had not heard in over a year. He watched her hand rest on the arm of man after man after man, each one leading her into a dance he had not offered. At 11:30, the musicians began the final set, a waltz, Lady Fairbourne's preference, always a waltz to close, intimate and slow, the dance that required the closest hold and the steadiest hand. Cecily stood. She did not look for a partner. She simply stood, and the motion itself was enough to draw the attention of every person near the dance floor, because they had been waiting for this moment since 9 o'clock, and they knew, as audiences always know, that the evening's meaning would be decided in the next 30 seconds. The Duke set down his glass. He crossed the floor. He did not hurry. He did not hesitate. He moved with the unhurried precision of a man walking toward something he should have walked toward 8 months ago, and when he reached her, he extended his hand without speaking. Cecily looked at the hand. She looked at his face. She saw something there that she had not seen in 4 years of marriage. Not tenderness, not apology, but recognition. The particular expression of a man who has just understood that the woman standing before him is not the woman he had filed away in his mind under adequate and forgettable, but someone else entirely. Someone who had walked into a room he had tried to bar her from and made it hers. She placed her hand in his. They danced. The waltz was simple, 3/4 time, the melody carrying them in circles that felt, to those watching, like the visible rotation of something that had been locked for a very long time. He held her correctly. She followed correctly. They did not speak, but his hand pressed against her back with a steadiness that said something words would have cheapened, and she allowed her weight to settle into the hold by a fraction, the smallest possible concession, the width of a breath. And it was enough. Lady Fairbourne watched from beside the musicians. She did not smile. She had known Cecily long enough to understand that what she was watching was not a reconciliation. It was a beginning, the kind that only comes after a particular sort of ending, when both parties understand that what was broken cannot be repaired, but might, with extraordinary care, be built again from different materials. The music ended. The Duke released his wife. She curtsied, formal, correct, the curtsy of a duchess to a duke at a public ball. He bowed. They stood 3 feet apart in the candlelight while 300 people held their breath, and then Cecily said very quietly, "I shall return to the Dower House tonight." He said, "I know." She looked at him. "Will you instruct Mr. Ives to remove me from the next guest list as well?" Something moved behind his eyes. Not shame exactly, but its cousin. The expression of a man who has just heard his own behavior described in a single sentence and found it smaller than he had imagined. "No," he said, "then I shall see you at the next occasion." She left before he did. Her carriage was waiting. She had arranged it herself because she had learned over 8 months of arranging everything herself that competence was not a consolation, but it was a foundation, and foundations were what you built on when everything above them had proven unsound. The Duke stood in the Fairbourne entrance hall and watched her carriage lanterns disappear down the drive. He stood there long enough that a footman approached twice and was waved away twice, and when he finally turned back into the house, Lady Fairbourne was standing in the corridor with her arms folded and an expression that contained no sympathy whatsoever. "She was extraordinary," Lady Fairbourne said. "Yes, she has always been extraordinary. You simply were not in the room long enough to notice." He did not reply. He collected his coat and his hat and his dignity, such of it as remained, and he went home to a house that felt for the first time like a building rather than a residence. The hallway was dark. The candles in the entrance had burned low, and the footman who met him at the door took his coat with the careful neutrality of a servant who had heard from the kitchen staff who had heard from the Fairbourne kitchen staff exactly what had happened at the ball. He climbed the stairs. He passed the Duchess's chambers. The door was closed as it had been for 8 months, but the scent of fresh flowers reached him through the wood. Mrs. Quelch had never stopped placing them there, lilies in winter, roses in spring, and now, in the warmth of early summer, something he could not identify, sweet and persistent and entirely unlike anything he would have chosen, which meant it was exactly what Cecily would have wanted. He had never asked why Mrs. Quelch continued the arrangement. He understood now. The housekeeper had been keeping the room alive because she had understood long before the Duke had that the absence was temporary, not because reconciliation was certain, but because a woman like Cecily Stowe did not disappear. She simply chose when to return. The following week, the Duke of Denham did something he had not done in 8 months. He walked to the Dower House. He did not send a note. He did not instruct Mr. Ives to arrange a meeting. He walked across the south lawn, through the walled garden, past the rose beds that Cecily had planted in November and that were now, in the fullness of early summer, producing blooms of such reckless beauty that the gardener had taken to showing them to visitors as though they were his own achievement. She was sitting at her writing desk when he arrived. She did not stand. She looked at him through the window for a moment, measuring, perhaps, whether the man walking toward her door was the same man who had written 3 lines to erase her from a room or someone different, and then she returned to her letter. He knocked. She called him in. He stood in the doorway of a cottage that contained everything she had taken from their marriage, her books, her desk, her tea service, the small watercolor of her mother that had hung in the upstairs corridor and that he had never once looked at closely enough to know what it depicted. And he said, "I should like to call on you, properly, if you would permit it." She set down her pen. "Call on me." "Yes." "You wish to call on your own wife." "I wish to begin again." "And beginning requires asking." She considered this. The roses outside the window caught the afternoon light and held it. She could hear the gardener working, the real one, not the phantom one Farrant denied sending. And somewhere beyond the garden wall, a thrush was singing with the unself-conscious authority of a creature that had never once been removed from a guest list. "Tuesday," she said. "You may call on Tuesday. I take tea at 4. He nodded. He did not smile. She would not have trusted a smile, not yet. But something in his posture shifted, a release of tension so subtle that only a woman who had spent 4 years studying his silences would have caught it. He turned and walked back across the south lawn, and Cecily watched him go. and she did not allow herself to feel anything as uncomplicated as hope. But she did allow herself to feel curious, which was, she suspected, close enough. He came on Tuesday. He came on Thursday. He came the following Tuesday. Each visit lasted precisely the length of a cup of tea, 40 minutes, no more. And during those 40 minutes he asked her questions he had never asked in 4 years of marriage. What she read, what she thought of the tenant reforms he was proposing in the House of Lords, whether she preferred the South Garden or the walled garden, whether the roses were hers. "Of course they are mine," she said on the third visit. "Who else's would they be?" He looked at the blooms through the window. "I did not know you gardened." "You did not know a great many things." "No," he said. "I did not." On the fifth visit, it rained. The cottage windows streamed with it, and the sound of water against the old stone walls created a privacy that fine weather never could. Cecily poured his tea the way she had always poured it. Strong, no sugar, a quarter inch from the brim, and he watched her hands and realized that she had always known how he took his tea, and he had never once known how she took hers. He looked at her cup. Milk. A half spoon of honey. The honey jar sat on the shelf beside the window, and it had a crack in the lid that had been mended with glue, and he understood, looking at it, that this was a life, small, complete, self-sufficient, and that she had built it without him, and that the building of it was not a reproach but a fact, and facts were harder to argue with than accusations. "Honey," he said. She looked at him. "I beg your pardon?" "You take honey in your tea." "I've always taken honey in my tea." He set down his cup. He did not apologize. She would not have accepted an apology, and he was learning, slowly, that what she required was not contrition but attention, which was both simpler and infinitely more difficult. "Tell me what else," he said. She studied him for a long moment. The rain continued against the windows. "I dislike gooseberries," she said. "I read before I sleep, always, never less than an hour. I cannot bear the sound of a clock ticking in a bedroom. I prefer lavender soap to rose, though every gift I have ever received has been rose, because no one has ever asked." He was quiet. Then, "Lavender. Yes, I shall remember." "We shall see," she said, and poured him more tea, and the afternoon held them there until the rain stopped and the garden shone. By the fourth visit, he stayed for an hour. By the sixth, Mrs. Quelch had begun setting 2 places for tea at the Dower House without being asked, and Farrant had stopped pretending the gardener was not his doing and simply added the cottage beds to the estate's maintenance schedule. In August, the Dower House was closed, not dramatically. There was no ceremony, no pronouncement. Cecily's books returned to the library. Her writing desk was placed in the morning room, beside the window that overlooked the south lawn. Her watercolor of her mother was rehung in the upstairs corridor, and the Duke stood before it for 10 minutes and saw for the first time that the woman in the painting had the same expression Cecily wore when she was deciding whether someone deserved her patience, an expression he now understood he had been the subject of far more often than he had earned. Mr. Ives tendered his resignation in September. He cited personal reasons. Cecily, who understood the real ones with the accuracy of a woman who had spent 8 months understanding everything no one told her, accepted the resignation with grace, provided a reference of such warmth that Mr. Ives found employment within a fortnight, and never mentioned the letter to Lady Fairborn's secretary. She did not need to. Some debts are not collected. They are simply known. The following June, a daughter was born at the great house. They named her Frances, after no one in particular. Cecily had wanted a name that belonged entirely to the child and not to the family's history of expectations. The christening was held at the parish church, and Lady Fairborn stood as godmother, holding the infant with the confident authority of a woman who had been waiting for this role since the wedding and intended to execute it with vigor. At the reception afterward, Lady Fairborn found the Duke standing alone in the garden. He was watching Cecily through the drawing-room window. She was laughing at something the vicar's wife had said, and the sound carried through the open casement into the warm afternoon air. "You are staring," Lady Fairborn observed. "I am. You should go inside and be with your wife and daughter." "I will, in a moment." Lady Fairborn followed his gaze. "She was always this. You understand that. You did not create what you see now. You merely stopped preventing it." He was quiet for a long time. "I wrote to her father once," he said, "before the separation. 3 lines. I told Mr. Ives to have her removed from your guest list with similar economy." He paused. "I've spent a year attempting to understand how I became a man who could reduce a woman like Cecily to 3 lines on a page." "And have you succeeded?" "No, I have only succeeded in understanding that the failure was total and that its correction will take considerably longer than its commission." "Good," said Lady Fairborn. "That is the correct answer." She went inside. After a moment, the Duke followed. Cecily looked up as he entered, not with surprise, not with expectation, but with the steady attention of a woman who had once sat beside a man in a room he had tried to empty of her, and who had decided, with the same quiet authority with which she decided everything, that the room was hers. He sat beside her. Frances slept in Lady Fairborn's arms. The afternoon light came through the windows and laid itself across the floorboards like a benediction, and in Mr. Ives's former study, a drawer contained nothing of consequence. They arrive here, like a name spoken aloud in a crowded room, whenever they are ready.